We're in the Bronx right now, and you can see behind me a 7-story apartment building that partially collapsed. Well, it's unclear what caused the collapse. It's obvious that there was something profoundly wrong with the structure of the building and that the existing measures of oversight were completely insufficient. In 2021, the American Civil Society of Engineers raised America's infrastructure rating to a C- from a D+, America's highest rating in 20 years. Here in New York City, critical infrastructure like bridges and infrastructure related to the subway or flooding are, like the building behind me, nearly a century old and structurally deficient. You would think that infrastructure, the literal foundation of any country, would be the fundamental priority of any given government. But in Washington, infrastructure isn't even a conversation right now, and the bill from 2 years ago proved to be completely insufficient. The White House's latest budget proposal would allocate no money to infrastructure, but a whopping $106 billion in weapons to Israel, Ukraine, and militarizing the southern border.
Why do you think the politicians don't invest in infrastructure and instead put the money in war?
No, because it's a profit thing. Listen, I'm a Vietnam vet. I came out in '72. That, to me, it was the worst war because it was all BS. Everybody got money. So now they're going to send weapons. They need weapons here, meaning weapon of food, instructor, things like that.
Witnesses described the collapse as feeling like an earthquake. A video that captured the moment of the collapse shows the side of the building completely giving out in a matter of a few seconds. Photos of the century-old apartment building on Google Maps show cracks in the side of the building. The building also had a number of open violations, many of which were unrelated to its structural integrity, but a few of which pose possible risks. Now, over 140 people are displaced.
I'm here because I'm concerned about my building that has a whole bunch of cracks on the first floor, and every other floor has cracks. But on the first floor has a whole bunch of cracks, and then on the ceiling has cracks when you're going up to the steps in every other floors. And then some of the steps itself has cracks. I'm concerned for myself and to me to survive in that building, and the people, all the kids in the buildings there, because we live there. I've been there for 42 years, and there's no kind of repairs, anything being done on in that building. We don't want this to be a repeat. For my building or any other building or any other person, don't wish this to go on to no one. Like everybody else, housing is real tough to get right now, and we can't afford these buildings to go down. Could you do something for us, Mr. Mayor, please?
While the collapse of this building took the city by surprise, it's also not a problem unique to the Bronx. America's infrastructure is among the worst in the developed world. Of the 17 categories on the American Society of Civil Engineers report card, the United States got a D in 11. The report found that of the 617,000 bridges in the US, nearly half are over 50 years old, and 46,000 of them are structurally deficient. 178 million trips are taken across these structurally deficient bridges every single day. 40% of the roads in the US are also in poor or mediocre condition. The report also found that there's a water main break in the US every 2 minutes, resulting in the loss of over 6 billion gallons of treated water every single day. These problems are also interconnected. For example, the report cites a massive funding gap for stormwater systems, which are currently mostly inadequate in the face of flash floods and storms. However, it was flooding that also caused the collapse of the water infrastructure in Jackson, Mississippi, leaving Jackson's 150,000 residents without clean drinking water for 3 months. The common issue underlying all of these problems is funding. America's infrastructure is simply underfunded. So this begs the question, where is all the money going? And the answer is the military. Military spending is the largest portion of the US discretionary spending budget by far. The 2024 military budget that's going through Congress right now and is expected to pass would allocate $886 billion to the military, a new record. But this figure doesn't even include war-related spending by government agencies other than the Department of Defense. When you include things like the nuclear budget, which falls under the Department of Energy, the actual figure comes out closer to $1.5 trillion spent annually. The US spends more in the military than the next 10 highest spenders combined, and has spent a mind-boggling $21 trillion on domestic and foreign militarization since 9/11. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers report, continued underfunding of US infrastructure would cost the country $10 trillion in GDP, 3 million jobs, and $2.4 trillion in exports in the next 20 years. Never mind the time wasted and the lives ruined when our infrastructure fails us. In order to prevent this, the ASCE says we need to invest $2.59 trillion in our infrastructure over the next 10 years. And while that sounds like a lot, that's $259 billion a year, which is less than a third of the $886 billion military budget that's likely to pass later this year. So, in other words, the US could pay for all the infrastructure upgrades needed across the country just by cutting the military budget by a third, and it would still be spending nearly 3 times as much as the next biggest military spender, which is China. You'd think that investing in infrastructure would be an issue that would unite both parties, but the last infrastructure bill passed 2 years ago was whittled down to a shell of its former self by partisan infighting and provides about $550 billion of new infrastructure investment over the next 10 years. Less than 1/4 of what the American Society of Civil Engineers has called for. Meanwhile, Congress has passed 4 separate spending packages for Ukraine totaling $113 billion in the last year, each of these packages passing with nearly unanimous support. This upcoming spending bill, which would allocate $106 billion to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the southern border, has been met with a little more controversy, not because it would commit more money to war, but because the Republicans want to condition the aid on militarizing the border further. War is so integral to the US economy that a lot of people ask quite reasonably if we would have jobs without it. And that's by design. Weapons manufacturers intentionally build their factories and offices across as many congressional districts as possible so that congressional members can't vote against war without also voting against the jobs associated with it. The war industry spends around $100 million a year lobbying Congress and donating to their campaigns to assure their loyalty. So they essentially hold our economy and foreign policy hostage, destroy the planet, and then tell us that they're providing us jobs. But we don't need war to have jobs. We could easily build a peace economy where the tens of trillions of dollars invested into building bombs and bullets instead went to building bridges and high-speed rail, to unleashing the power of the untapped renewable energies around us and creating a new standard of living in a highly technological society where scarcity and poverty are things of the past. In the richest country in the history of humanity, there is no reason that apartment buildings should be collapsing on people's heads while trillions of dollars are being spent on war. And the fact that this happens so often proves that these wars have nothing to do with securing our way of life. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.